Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Jessanori on this beautiful sunny afternoon. Today we are still with Yeli on her cathedral tour, and she is about to reach the apex of it. Time to move on. The next day it was Hexham, and after that Durham, which to Yeli was the most beautiful of all, yet which brought even more pain than York. You can perform the Bach chaconne at sunset by the altar of a holy site more than 10 centuries old, while 1,000 people drink music through golden dusky light. But when they come to you afterwards and tell you their stories, the reality begins to hit home. 2 women came up to Yeli to thank her, each with several children in tow. She asked them a few gentle questions, and their stories came tumbling out. Nearby Newcastle, once thriving with shipyards and coal mines, lay with its wheels stilled and its furnaces cold. Their husbands had not worked for 2 years. She looked down at the little boys, who were pulling on their mother's hands, itching to get away from this dull grown-ups conversation. Their toes were popping out at the ends of their cracked shoes. What prospect was there for the children? The women demanded, watching their fathers lose the dignity work gave them. All they had left was dole, and everyone looking over their shoulders to see who was worse off than themselves, and the means test men who would march into the house and force them to sell their chairs before allowing them a farthing of government support. The mothers talked, sentences falling over one another. Nobody was hiring, but the government in faraway London still blamed the unemployed for not wanting to work. Of course they wanted to work. No one would choose to raise a family on a handout of a few shillings a week. But us, we can't change the world, said the younger woman. We can't change anything. Yeli, clasping the neck of her violin, listened and didn't know what to say. She wanted to understand why. So did they. Was this the paying off of debts incurred by the war that finished 15 years ago? The knock-on effect of the stock market crash? The poor forced to feed the greed of the rich? Or something even worse? A loss of faith? And in the middle of that, an angel, a violin, the music of Bach. Thank you, Mr. Ragni. We'll never forget you. We'll never forget what you did for us tonight. Yeli could barely answer. She was in tears. I'm so moved. I'm speechless. I had no idea it would be like this. A headline in the Times seized on the York Minster Dean's remark about a pilgrimage of compassion. That wasn't her idea. She wanted to play for nothing, to people who had nothing because she had something to give. Their response was more precious to her than any financial return. This should be commonplace for a musician, she told Ardila, but apparently it was extraordinary. Her confidence grew. After Durham, she had 4 days to get her breath before Lincoln, then time to go home briefly, before starting on the south-west route to Winchester, Salisbury, Chichester, the big day at Westminster Abbey, and finally Gloucester. She began to experiment. In Chichester, she started by playing in the organ loft, then came downstairs for the Bach, and only then noticed that the audience wasn't packed only through the nave, but through every side chapel and outside in the cloisters. The south was less harrowing, the concentration of poverty less intense. From Winchester, 75% of the takings would go to the Northern Industries Workroom Council, where it was most needed, and the remainder to the unemployed of Hampshire. English summers, though, were English summers, and cathedrals were difficult to keep warm when it rained, as it did copiously. Before the concerts, while she paced about in the vestry, sometimes Yeli's hands were so cold that the knuckles hurt as if she'd rammed nails into them. Her gowns might be simple, but the backs usually involved a fashionable plunge, exposing her shoulder blades to the chilly church air. Waking in hotels or deaneries the morning after, she would feel pain colonising her spine, arms and sacroiliacs as if injected while she slept. Everywhere her audience came up to thank her for giving them so much of her spirit. She fixed her smile, looked them in the eye and thanked them in return, while, in truth, she wanted to crawl away and howl. The spirit wasn't the problem. It was her body that was wearing out. July arrived. Yeli, aching and exhausted, was home at last, with just 2 more concerts to go, sitting in a Chinese silk dressing gown on her bedroom floor, surrounded by mounds of unopened correspondence. She felt she scarcely had enough energy to slit the envelopes, until she found one she really wanted. "How I wish I could be with you for the Westminster Abbey concert," Tom wrote. "Please don't waste your time worrying about me. Go there and play wonderfully. That's all I ask." Yeli hunted for a handkerchief. There was one by her bed. She sat down to mop up, but a cricket bat of exhaustion seemed to swing into her face. Surely she could just take 15 minutes for a nap? Caesar found her there and jumped up to lick her face before settling by the crook of her knee. 4 hours later, Ardila, who was joining her to perform in the Abbey, was less easygoing. "Shy, what is going on? I'll call the doctor." "No, Ardi, I just need to rest. Let me sleep." Yeli smiled at her sister, who leaned over and hugged her as if trying to transform her overwhelming energy into Yeli's delicate frame. She was in such pain that she could scarcely turn over. The evening before Westminster, Eric arrived with a bouquet for the sisters almost the size of the sofa. Yeli hauled herself upright and put on a white blouse and light skirt. She'd been in bed for 3 days. Claws of pain dug into her back when she tried to bend over her chest of drawers to find some stockings. The impact of each step rebounded through her right hip. "Yeli's hurt her back and she's tired out," Alec was telling Eric, when Yeli, after clunky progress down the stairs, arrived in the music room. Ardila was arranging the flowers in a porcelain vase that bore only one tiny chip. The evening was warm and she had flung open the doors to the garden, letting in the scent of roses and rays of light giddy with spiralling sunbeams. Madge had come for a lesson, but now she was out on the lawn playing with Adrienne, a tennis ball, and the dog. Alec and Eric were both relaxed and smiling in their shirt sleeves. Yeli made an effort to put on her public self, trying to ignore what was happening to her joints. She saw a flash of concern in the Baron's perceptive eyes. "It's all right," she said. "I'll be fine tomorrow." "She won't let us call the doctor," Ardila growled. 3,000 people we expect in Westminster Abbey, and my sister cannot move." "I won't make you play on your own if that's what worries you," Yeli teased. "You will have good company," Eric said. "We have had a session this afternoon with our friends who tell me they will all be there to hear you." For a moment, Yeli thought he meant living people. She wondered how much Ardila truly believed in the presence of these spirits, and how much she might herself. Ardila, as far as she knew, had never questioned her belief in God, but Yeli, seeing the consumptive patients around Anna, the begging children in Yorkshire and the shipyard wives in Durham, now found herself inwardly interrogating any deity's actions on a regular basis. "Don't worry, Shy," said Alec. "The reality is only what we can do for others, human to human. Believe me, you're doing more than most." A commotion from the garden, and the little girls bounced in, flushed, happy and ready for cake and ice cream. "Darlings, something wonderful has happened. We have been speaking to Schumann and Joachim," Ardila cried, slicing giant pieces of plum cake. "Just think, when you are there tomorrow listening to us, so are they." Madge's astute blue eyes cast a sphinx-like stare at her violin teacher. "I was going to ask, please can I telephone Jane to pick me up?" Jane, Madge's stepsister, 10 years her senior, was an excellent cellist who often came round to play chamber music. "Of course, darling, tell her to come now and have tea, and tomorrow you will both come to the concert." "Isn't it only for unemployed people?" No, it is for everyone, free. And then there is a collection at the door for the unemployed. That is the point. A collection to which all those spirit friends are not well placed to contribute, Alec remarked, while Madge slunk towards the telephone. I hope her mother won't change her mind about the lessons. She's so gifted. She's making such progress. Why ever would she change? Well, don't you think we should perhaps be more discreet about these little visitations? Not everyone approves, you know. People find it a bit odd. You know, attitudes aren't exactly as receptive to these things as they used to be. But sweetheart, it is true, it is happening to us. How can one argue with that? People only believe what they want to believe. And if they don't want to believe something, nothing you can say will change that. They'll always find a way around it. It's human nature. Besides, there are too many frauds. You're sure it's real, aren't you? I'm ready to be convinced, he smiled. Adela glowered. This is still incontrovertible evidence. There is an afterlife and the spirits of the department are communicating with us. What are they going to do about that? One day our research will show it all. I love the way it's called research, said Alec. Who's for another cup of tea? Big Ben was striking 4 when Yali and Adela walked together into Westminster Abbey. Inside, they paused at the tomb of the unknown warrior. For the unknown war dead, wherever they fell, read the inscription. They both remembered the unveiling in 1920 and the crowds that flocked to pay tribute to the dead soldier. Over 1.25 million in the week after the burial, Alec reported. Queues as far as Parliament. Everyone in the country seemed to have someone to mourn. A husband, a father, a son, a brother, a fiancé, or several of these. Yeli had shed tears in Westminster Abbey for Sepp, though at home she rarely spoke of her pain. Everyone might tease her about being over-emotional, but she was quite capable of keeping her deepest feelings to herself and her violin when she wished. 17 years after Sepp's death, the tombstone still tore at her. Adela understood. She slid her arm through her sister's and squeezed. She read out the inscription at the side. Unknown and yet well known, dying and behold we live. Do you think it's Sepp down there? It doesn't seem fair that we only mark this one because we think he was British, said Yeli. They all fought for us. She stood, absorbing herself into her surroundings. The Gothic arches, the dark wood of the screed, the tombs of Chaucer, Purcell, Henry V. Stained glass scattered flecks of royal blue, tangerine and scarlet onto the ancient stone. Supposing the spirits of those composers and her great-uncle really were there watching her. And if they were, what of Sepp? What of her parents? She had to stop thinking about it. They decided to play from the organ loft, where it would be easiest to coordinate with their accompanist. Shortly before it was time to start, after he had gone out to make his preparations, Yeli lay down on a rug on the floor, stretching out her aching back. Above her, soot-stained vaulting reached towards infinity. Shy, we should go and get dressed. Adela held out her hands to pull her up. I'm floating. Come and try it. Yeli patted the floor beside her. Adela lumbered down and lay back. The sisters stayed there in silence, gazing up into the arches. You could take leave of Earth like this, Yeli said. Listen, everyone's arriving. The hum of voices in the air reminded Yeli of bees in the Dorset heather, staring only upward, while different protrusions of carved stone tossed sounds between them. She couldn't identify the directions of the myriad noises. They could have been the spirits murmuring, winging around in search of a good spot on which to perch and listen. Proof of spirits meant proof of an afterlife. And was not that the real problem with her Schumann concerto? I feel better. Let's go and change. As Yeli stood up, the blanket of pain seemed to rise and carry on rising, leaving her body clear, her breath controlled, and her hands warm, supple, and ready for anything. Nervous? Adela was moistening her own lips. Not remotely. With her violin and bow in her hands, her sister beside her, and, who knows, invisible spirits giving their support, Yeli felt the freedom of the stage taking hold. Tonight would be one of their best concerts. She needed no more reassurance. Thank you very much. We'll be back tomorrow with the next developments in the search for the Schumann Concerto. Good night.